Hello, horror lover. Are you ready for a long night of nightmares? Before we begin, I want to ask you to subscribe to the channel, and especially leave a comment telling me which city you're watching from. I'd love to know. Click the like button, all of this because the incessant pounding in my head dragged me from the depths of unconsciousness. I groaned, my mouth dry as sandpaper, the taste of stale alcohol lingering on my tongue. Las Vegas. Right. The memories of the previous night were a blur of neon lights, the cacophony of slot machines, and far too many shots of tequila. I forced my eyes open, immediately regretting it as the harsh sunlight streaming through the hotel room's partially open curtains assaulted my retinas. Jesus, I muttered, throwing an arm over my face to shield my eyes. The movement sent a wave of nausea through me, and I swallowed hard, willing my stomach to settle. Slowly I sat up, my head spinning. The room came into focus gradually. Clothes strewn across the floor, an overturned lamp, and an empty bottle of Jack Daniels on the nightstand. What the hell happened last night? I swung my legs over the side of the bed, wincing as my bare feet touched the cold tile floor. As I stood, a sharp pain shot through my left forearm. Fuck, I hissed, glancing down at my arm. And that's when I saw it. My heart nearly stopped. There, etched into my skin in stark black ink, was a series of numbers. 06, 15, 23, 09, 47, 32. What the fuck? I whispered, my voice hoarse. I blinked hard, certain I was hallucinating, but the numbers remained, clear as day against my pale skin. Panic rising in my throat, I stumbled to the bathroom, nearly tripping over my discarded jeans in the process. I flipped on the light and leaned over the sink, examining my arm closely in the mirror. The tattoo looked fresh, the skin around it slightly raised and reddened. No, I muttered, turning on the faucet and grabbing the complimentary bar of soap. I scrubbed at the tattoo furiously, my movements becoming more frantic as the ink refused to budge. Come on, come off, damn it. But it was no use. The numbers remained, stark and unyielding against my skin. I braced myself against the sink, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. How the hell did this happen? I had no memory of getting a tattoo. Sure, I'd been drunk, but surely not drunk enough to forget something like this. I splashed cold water on my face, trying to clear my head. As I reached for a towel, something caught my eye. I froze, staring at my arm in disbelief. The numbers were changing. 6, 15, 23, 09, 48, 03. I blinked hard, certain I was seeing things. But no. The seconds were ticking by in real time, perfectly synchronized with the digital clock on the nightstand visible through the open bathroom door. This isn't happening, I said aloud, my voice echoing in the small bathroom. This can't be real. I pinched myself hard, wincing at the pain. Not a dream then. I splashed more water on my face, scrubbed my eyes, anything to wake myself up from this nightmare. But every time I looked, the numbers were still there, still changing. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. Was this some kind of elaborate prank? Had I been drugged? Or was I simply losing my mind? The room suddenly felt too small, too confining. I needed air. I needed help. I needed Jake. With trembling hands, I fumbled for my phone, knocking it off the nightstand in my haste. I snatched it up from the floor, relieved to see it wasn't cracked. My fingers shook as I scrolled through my contacts, finally finding Jake's number. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Come on, I muttered. Finally, a click. Ryan? Jake's voice was groggy with sleep. Do you have any idea what time it is? Jake, I said, my voice cracking. I need you to come over. Now. There must have been something in my tone because Jake's voice immediately sharpened. Ryan, what's wrong? Are you okay? I laughed, a hysterical edge to the sound. No, man. I'm pretty fucking far from okay. I need you to come to my room. Please. All right, Jake said, and I could hear rustling in the background as he presumably got out of bed. I'm in room 1412. Where are you? 1623, I replied, glancing at the room number scrawled on the keycard envelope on the desk. Okay, I'll be there in 5. Hang tight, buddy. The line went dead, and I sank down onto the bed, my eyes fixed on the ever-changing numbers on my arm. What the hell was happening to me? The minutes crawled by, each second marked by the relentless ticking of the numbers on my arm. I paced the room, alternating between staring at the tattoo and looking away, as if by ignoring it I could make it disappear. Finally, a knock at the door made me jump. "Ryan, it's me!" Jake called from the hallway. I yanked the door open, probably looking like a wild man with my disheveled hair and wide, panicked eyes. Jake stood there in sweatpants and a rumpled t-shirt, concern etched on his face. "Jesus, Ryan, you look like hell," he said, stepping into the room. "What's going on?" I held out my arm wordlessly, the numbers now reading 06, 23, 10, 01, 17. Jake's eyebrows furrowed as he examined my arm. "When did you get a tattoo? And why the hell would you get a clock?" "I didn't," I said, my voice hoarse. "I woke up with it, and Jake, it's changing." Jake looked at me like I'd grown a second head. "Changing? What do you mean, changing?" "Look," I said, pointing at the numbers. We both watched in silence as the seconds ticked by. Jake's face paled. That's not possible," he muttered, reaching out to touch the tattoo. I flinched away instinctively. "Ryan, what the hell is this?" "I don't know," I said, running a hand through my hair. "I don't know, man. I woke up and it was just there, and it won't come off. I tried scrubbing it, but it won't budge." Jake took a deep breath, visibly trying to process what he was seeing. "Okay, let's think about this logically. What's the last thing you remember from last night?" I closed my eyes, trying to focus through the lingering haze of my hangover. "We were at the Bellagio. I remember playing blackjack, winning big. Then we went to that club. What was it called?" "XS," Jake supplied. "At the Wynn." "Right, XS," I nodded. "I remember doing shots with those girls from Cincinnati. After that, it's all a blur." Jake frowned. "I lost track of you around 2 a.m. You were pretty wasted, man. I tried to get you to come back to the hotel, but you said you wanted to keep partying." I groaned, sitting heavily on the bed. Shit. So anything could have happened after that. But a tattoo. Jake shook his head. "Even if you were blackout drunk, no reputable artist would tattoo someone in that state. And this," he gestured at my arm, "this isn't normal, Ryan. Tattoos don't change." As if on cue, a distant wail of sirens cut through the air. I felt a chill run down my spine as I glanced at my arm. 06, 15, 23, 10, 15 now. Jake and I exchanged a look of unease. The sirens grew louder, seemingly getting closer to our hotel. "Turn on the TV," I said suddenly, a sense of dread settling in my stomach. Jake grabbed the remote, flicking on the large flat screen mounted on the wall. He flipped through channels until he found a local news station. The words "breaking news" flashed across the screen, followed by a grim-faced reporter standing in front of what looked like chaos. Smoke billowed in the background, and emergency vehicles with flashing lights filled the frame. Just coming in. At approximately 10:15 a.m., a devastating multi-vehicle pileup occurred on the I-15, just outside of Las Vegas. Early reports suggest at least a dozen vehicles were involved. We're still waiting on official numbers, but witnesses report multiple casualties. Emergency services are on the scene. I felt the blood drain from my face as I looked down at my arm. Euro 6, ton 15, 23, 10, 15, Samir. The exact time of the accident. "Jake," I whispered, my voice trembling. "What the hell is happening to me?" Jake just stared at me, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. Outside, the wail of sirens continued, a chilling accompaniment to the nightmare unfolding around us. As the gravity of the situation settled over us like a heavy blanket, I couldn't shake the terrifying thought that somehow, some way, the mysterious numbers on my arm were connected to this tragedy. And if that was true, what did it mean for the future? What other horrors were encoded in this ever-changing tattoo? The room suddenly felt too small, the weight of this new reality threatening to crush me. As Jake and I sat in stunned silence, the numbers on my arm continued their relentless march forward, each tick a reminder of the bizarre and terrifying journey that lay ahead. The acrid smell of burnt coffee filled the hotel room, a failed attempt at sobering up and clearing our minds. Jake paced back and forth, his fingers drumming an erratic rhythm against his thigh. I sat on the edge of the bed, my eyes glued to the TV screen, unable to look away from the horrific scene unfolding on the I-15. "This can't be happening," I muttered for what felt like the 100th time. "It's got to be a coincidence, right?" Jake stopped his pacing, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "I don't know, man. I don't know what to think anymore." The news anchor's voice droned on, a grim soundtrack to our disbelief. "The death toll continues to rise. Authorities are now reporting at least 23 fatalities in this tragic multi-vehicle pileup." My heart stopped. Slowly, dreading what I might see, I looked down at my arm. The numbers now read 06-15-23, 11-30-23. "Jake," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Look." He leaned in, his eyes widening as he made the connection. 23, he breathed. That's the exact number of deaths," I finished, feeling sick to my stomach. "The exact number of deaths from the accident." Jake stumbled back, collapsing into the desk chair. "This is insane, Ryan. We need to, I don't know, call someone. The police, maybe?" I barked out a laugh, the sound harsh and humorless. "And tell them what? That I woke up with a magic tattoo that predicts disasters. They'd throw me in a padded cell." "Then a doctor," Jake insisted. "There's got to be a logical explanation for this." I was about to argue when a sharp tingling sensation in my arm made me gasp. The numbers were changing again, faster this time. 06, 15, 23, 14, 45, 17. "It's happening again," I said, my voice tight with fear. Jake leaned in, watching as the numbers settled. "What do you think it means?" I shook my head, feeling helpless. "I don't know. But I've got a bad feeling we're going to find out soon." The next few hours were torture. We remained glued to the TV, flipping between news channels, dreading what might come next. Jake ordered room service, but neither of us could eat. The food grew cold, untouched on the coffee table. As the clock ticked closer to 2:45 p.m., my anxiety reached a fever pitch. I couldn't sit still, pacing the room, my eyes darting between the TV and my arm. "Maybe nothing will happen," Jake said, though his tone betrayed his lack of conviction. "Maybe it's just..." He was cut off by the urgent voice of a news anchor. "We're interrupting our regular programming to bring you breaking news. We're receiving reports of a major fire at the Luxor Hotel and Casino." My blood ran cold. I looked at Jake, seeing my own horror reflected in his eyes. "No," I whispered. "No, no, no." But the nightmare was only beginning. We watched, helpless, as cameras showed thick black smoke billowing from the iconic pyramid-shaped building. Flames licked at the windows, and people streamed out of the exits in panic. "Oh, God," Jake muttered, his face ashen. "Ryan, we have to do something." I shook my head, feeling numb. "What can we do? We're miles away, and even if we weren't, Jake, we can't stop this." The next hour was a blur of terrifying images and grim updates. Fire crews battled the blaze, but the unique architecture of the Luxor made their job incredibly difficult. We watched in horror as a helicopter camera showed people trapped on the upper floors, waving desperately for help. At 3:45 p.m., exactly 1 hour after the fire started, the news anchor's voice cracked as she delivered the latest update. "We've just received confirmation from the Las Vegas Fire Department. The current death toll from the Luxor fire stands at 52 individuals." The room spun around me. I looked down at my arm, already knowing what I'd see. 06-15, 23, 15, 45, 52. I bolted for the bathroom, barely making it to the toilet before emptying the meager contents of my stomach. Jake was right behind me, his hand on my back as I retched and sobbed. This can't be real, I gasped between heaves. Tell me this isn't real, Jake. But he had no words of comfort to offer. We both knew the terrifying truth. Somehow the numbers on my arm were tied to these tragedies, and there was nothing we could do about it. As I slumped against the cool tile of the bathroom floor, Jake sat beside me, his face a mask of concern and fear. What are we going to do, Ryan? I shook my head, feeling utterly lost. I don't know, I don't know. We sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of what was happening pressing down on us. Finally, Jake spoke up, his voice hesitant. Maybe we should try to warn someone next time. I looked at him sharply. Warn them? How? Who would believe us? I don't know, Jake admitted, but we have to try something. We can't just sit here and watch people die. The thought of trying to prevent these disasters filled me with a mix of hope and dread. And what if we make things worse, I asked, voicing my deepest fear. What if by interfering we somehow cause even more deaths? Jake had no answer for that. We lapsed into silence again, each lost in our own thoughts. As the day wore on, we remained in the hotel room, glued to the news. The Luxor fire dominated every channel, with eyewitness accounts, expert analysis, and heartbreaking stories of those lost in the tragedy. I kept a wary eye on my arm, dreading the next change in numbers. But as night fell, the tattoo remained stable, showing the time and date of the Luxor fire. Maybe it's over, Jake said hopefully. Maybe it was just these two events. I wanted to believe him, but a nagging feeling in my gut told me this was far from over. I don't think so, I said quietly. I think this is just the beginning. As if to punctuate my words, a sharp pain shot through my arm. I hissed, clutching at the tattoo. Jake was at my side in an instant. What is it? What's happening? We watched in horrified fascination as the numbers shifted and changed, finally settling on a new date and time. 06/18/23 Bao. 3 days from now, I said, my voice hollow. Whatever's coming next, it's happening in 3 days. Jake swallowed hard. What do we do? I stood up, suddenly feeling claustrophobic in the hotel room that had been our prison for the past day. We need to get out of here, out of Vegas. I can't be here when the next thing happens. Jake nodded, already moving to pack his things. Where should we go? I thought for a moment, trying to come up with a plan through the fog of fear and exhaustion. My cabin, I said finally. The one in the mountains outside of Denver. It's isolated off the grid. Maybe there we can figure this out without hurting anyone else. As we hurriedly packed our bags, a thought occurred to me. Jake, I said, pausing in my frantic movements. You don't have to come with me. This thing. Whatever it is, it's happening to me, not you. You could walk away, pretend this never happened. Jake looked at me for a long moment, his expression a mix of fear and determination. No way, man. We've been through too much together. I'm not leaving you to face this alone. Relief and gratitude washed over me, momentarily overshadowing the dread that had taken up residence in my chest. Thanks, I said, my voice thick with emotion. As we left the hotel room, stepping into the warm Las Vegas night, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were embarking on a journey that would change our lives forever. The weight of the mysterious tattoo on my arm felt heavier than ever, a constant reminder of the burden I now carried. Whatever was coming next, whatever horrors the changing numbers on my arm foretold, I knew one thing for certain: nothing would ever be the same again. As Jake and I climbed into his car, ready to flee the city that had become the stage for unimaginable tragedy, I found myself wondering if we were driving towards answers, or towards an even greater nightmare. The lights of Las Vegas faded in the rearview mirror, and with them, any last vestiges of the normal life I once knew. Ahead lay uncertainty, fear, and the terrifying knowledge that somehow, some way, I was connected to events that were costing innocent people their lives. As we sped through the desert night, the numbers on my arm seemed to pulse with an ominous energy. 06:18, 23, 09, 30. A ticking time bomb, counting down to the next tragedy. And I was the unwilling harbinger of whatever horror awaited us. The cabin loomed before us, a dark silhouette against the star-studded Colorado sky. After nearly 15 hours of driving, switching off behind the wheel, we'd finally arrived. The isolation that had once made this place a peaceful retreat now felt ominous, as if the towering pines were closing in around us. Jake killed the engine, and for a moment we sat in silence, the sudden absence of the car's hum making my ears ring. "We made it," Jake said, his voice hoarse from fatigue and tension. I nodded, unable to find words. The numbers on my arm seemed to glow in the darkness of the car. 06:17:23, 2:15:43. Less than 12 hours until whatever was coming next. We dragged ourselves and our hastily packed bags into the cabin. The musty smell of disuse hit me as I flipped on the lights, illuminating the familiar rustic interior. How long had it been since I'd last been here? A year? 2? It felt like a lifetime ago. "I'll get the generator going," Jake said, already heading for the back door. "You want to try to get the satellite internet up?" I nodded, grateful for the task. Anything to keep my mind occupied, to stop the endless cycle of dread and speculation. An hour later, we had the basics set up. The hum of the generator provided a constant background noise, almost but not quite masking the eerie silence of the surrounding forest. My laptop was open on the coffee table, multiple tabs of news sites ready to go. Jake emerged from the small kitchen, 2 steaming mugs in hand. "It's just instant," he said apologetically, handing me one. "But it's caffeine." I took a sip, grimacing at the bitter taste. "Thanks," I muttered, my eyes never leaving the computer screen. Jake settled into the worn armchair across from me. "So what's the plan?" I laughed, a hollow sound that held no humor. "Plan? I don't have a plan, Jake. I have a ticking time bomb on my arm and no idea what to do about it." He leaned forward, his expression serious. "Then let's figure it out. We've got..." He glanced at his watch. "About 11 hours until whatever's going to happen happens. Let's use that time." I nodded, taking a deep breath. Okay, you're right. Let's break this down." We spent the next few hours going over everything we knew, which wasn't much. We created a timeline of events, starting with my drunken night in Vegas, and ending with our arrival at the cabin. We scrutinized every detail of the 2 tragedies we'd witnessed, looking for patterns, connections, anything that might give us a clue. As the night wore on, my eyes grew heavy, the adrenaline that had kept me going finally wearing off. Jake noticed my drooping eyelids. "Get some sleep," he said gently. "I'll keep watch." I wanted to argue, but exhaustion won out. I stumbled to the small bedroom, collapsing onto the bed without even bothering to undress. Sleep claimed me almost instantly. I jolted awake, heart pounding, a scream dying in my throat. The nightmare clung to me, images of burning buildings and mangled cars swirling in my mind. I looked at my arm, dreading what I might see. 6:18:23, 09:15:22. "Shit," I muttered, scrambling out of bed. I burst into the living room to find Jake hunched over the laptop, dark circles under his eyes. 15 minutes, I said, my voice tight with fear. Jake nodded grimly. "I've got every major news site open, plus local channels for all the big cities. If something happens, we'll know." The next quarter hour was the longest of my life. We sat in tense silence, refreshing web pages, flipping through TV channels, waiting for the other shoe to drop. 09:30, Warren came and went. 09:31, Warren. 09:32, Horn. 09:33, Warren. Nothing. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Maybe it's over, I said, hardly daring to hope. Jake shook his head, still scanning the news sites. I don't think so. Sometimes it takes a while for news to break. We should keep watching. He was right. At 09:47:13, my arm tingled, the numbers changing to match the current time. Simultaneously, a breaking news alert flashed across the screen. Massive earthquake strikes Tokyo, the headline read. Magnitude 7.8 quake causes widespread damage and casualties. My stomach dropped. No, I whispered. Not again. We watched in horror as the reports came in. Buildings collapsed. Fires broke out across the city. Tsunami warnings were issued for the coast. The death toll climbed rapidly. At 10:47:13, exactly 1 hour after the quake hit, my arm tingled again. I looked down, already knowing what I'd see. The number 1247 now followed the date and time. Jake, I said, my voice shaking. The death toll. Check the death toll. He quickly scanned the latest updates, his face paling. 247 confirmed dead. He read aloud. Exact match. I stumbled to the bathroom, barely making it before I threw up, my body rejecting the reality of what was happening. Jake was right behind me, his hand on my back as I heaved. When I was done, I slumped against the cool tile wall, tears streaming down my face. I can't do this, Jake, I sobbed. I can't keep watching people die. Jake sat beside me, his own eyes glistening. We'll figure this out, Ryan. We have to. Over the next few days, we fell into a grim routine. I obsessively documented every change in the numbers, creating a detailed log. Jake monitored the news constantly, cross-referencing my notes with world events. A pattern began to emerge. The numbers always changed twice for each event. The first change predicted the time of the disaster. The second change, exactly 1 hour later, showed the final death toll. We watched helplessly as tragedy after tragedy unfolded. A ferry sinking off the coast of Indonesia, a terrorist attack in London, a deadly tornado outbreak in the American Midwest. Each time, the numbers on my arm foretold the horror with chilling accuracy. I grew more withdrawn with each passing day, the weight of this terrible knowledge crushing me. Jake tried to keep my spirits up, but I could see the toll it was taking on him too. One evening, about a week into our self-imposed exile, Jake broached the subject we'd both been avoiding. Ryan, he said cautiously, I think we need to consider trying to prevent the next one. I looked up sharply from my notebook where I'd been recording the latest changes. We've been over this, Jake. We can't risk making things worse. But what if we could save lives? He pressed. We have advanced knowledge. We should use it. I stood up abruptly, pacing the small living room. And what if our interference causes even more deaths? What if instead of 100 people dying, 1,000 die because of our actions? Could you live with that? Jake fell silent, the weight of the hypothetical heavy in the air between us. I'm sorry, I said after a moment, deflating. I know you're just trying to help, but I'm terrified of making this even worse than it already is. Jake nodded, understanding in his eyes. I get it. I do. It's hard to sit here and do nothing. I know, I said softly. Believe me, I know. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, a new thought occurred to me. What if the tattoo wasn't just predicting these events? What if it was causing them somehow? The idea took root, growing like a cancer in my mind. By morning, I was convinced. Somehow, some way, I was responsible for these tragedies. I emerged from the bedroom, wild-eyed and disheveled. Jake took one look at me and knew something was wrong. Ryan, what is it? It's me, I said, my voice cracking. I'm causing this. The tattoo, the numbers. It's not just predicting these disasters, it's making them happen. Jake's brow furrowed in concern. Ryan, that's not possible. You can't cause earthquakes or terrorist attacks just by having numbers on your arm. How do you know? I shouted, weeks of pent-up fear and frustration boiling over. We don't understand how any of this works. For all we know, every time these numbers change, I'm sentencing people to death. Jake approached me cautiously, hands raised as if calming a wild animal. Listen to me, Ryan, you're not responsible for this. You're a victim in this situation, just like all those people. We'll figure this out, I promise. But as he pulled me into a hug, I couldn't shake the gnawing certainty that I was the linchpin in this terrible sequence of events. And as the numbers on my arm began to tingle, signaling another impending tragedy, I made a silent vow. I would find a way to end this, no matter the cost. The incessant ticking of the old grandfather clock in the corner of the cabin's living room seemed to mock me, each second bringing us closer to the next tragedy. I sat at the rickety wooden table, my eyes fixed on the numbers etched into my arm. 06, 25, 23, 14, 30, no. Jake paced back and forth, his footsteps creaking on the worn floorboards. We have to do something this time, Ryan, he said, his voice tight with determination. We can't just sit here and watch it happen again. I ran my hands through my hair, greasy from days of neglect. And what exactly do you propose we do? We don't even know where it's going to happen, let alone what. Jake stopped pacing and leaned over the table, his eyes meeting mine. But we know when. That's more than anyone else has. We have to try. The weight of his words hung in the air between us. He was right, of course. The guilt of inaction had been eating away at me, growing heavier with each disaster we witnessed from afar. But the fear of making things worse, of being responsible for even more deaths, paralyzed me. Okay, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. Okay, let's try. But how? Jake's face lit up with a glimmer of hope. First, we need to figure out where it's going to happen. Let's look at the pattern of the previous events. We spent the next hour poring over our notes, trying to discern any geographical pattern to the disasters. Earthquakes, terrorist attacks, industrial accidents, they seemed randomly distributed across the globe. Wait, Jake said suddenly, pointing at the map we'd pinned to the wall. Look at this. The events seem to be moving westward. I squinted at the map, seeing what Jake had noticed. From Tokyo to London to New York, there did seem to be a westward progression. So if the pattern holds, I said slowly, the next event should be somewhere on the west coast, Jake finished, probably California given the time. A chill ran down my spine. We were getting closer to pinpointing it, but we still had no idea what kind of disaster we were dealing with. Let's focus on major cities, I suggested. Los Angeles, San Francisco, San Diego. We'll monitor their local news and emergency services. Jake nodded, already pulling up websites on his laptop. Good idea. We've got about 3 hours until whatever it is happens. The next few hours were a blur of frantic research and mounting tension. We scoured social media, listened to police scanners, and refreshed news sites obsessively. As the clock ticked closer to 2:30 p.m., our anxiety reached a fever pitch. At 2:15 p.m., we got our first lead. Ryan, look at this, Jake called out, turning his laptop screen towards me. A local news site from San Francisco was reporting on a developing situation at the Golden Gate Bridge. Heavy traffic had caused a multi-car pileup, and there were concerns about the structural integrity of a section of the bridge. That's got to be it, I said, my heart racing. We need to warn them. Jake was already dialing the San Francisco Police Department. I listened as he tried to explain the situation, my stomach sinking as I heard the skepticism in the officer's responses. They're not buying it, Jake said as he hung up, frustration evident in his voice. They think it's a prank call. I glanced at my arm. 2:25 p.m. We're running out of time, I said, panic rising in my throat. We need to do something now. A crazy idea formed in my mind. Give me your phone, I said to Jake. He handed it over, confusion on his face. What are you going to do? I didn't answer, already dialing 911. When the operator answered, I took a deep breath and said, I'm on the Golden Gate Bridge. I have a bomb. Jake's eyes widened in shock, but I held up a hand to silence him. Sir, this is a very serious claim, the operator said, her voice tense. Can you give me more information? There's no time, I said, trying to sound as convincing as possible. You need to evacuate the bridge now. Lives are at stake. I hung up before she could ask any more questions. Jake stared at me, a mix of horror and admiration on his face. A bomb threat? Are you insane? He asked. It was the only way to make sure they'd take it seriously, I replied, my hands shaking. They'll have to evacuate now. We turned our attention back to the news sites and police scanner, waiting with bated breath to see if our intervention had worked. Reports of a bomb threat on the Golden Gate Bridge started flooding in. Traffic was being diverted and evacuation procedures were underway. As 2:30 p.m. approached, a spark of hope ignited in my chest. Maybe we had done it. Maybe we had changed fate. That hope was shattered at exactly 2:30 p.m. when my arm began to tingle. The numbers changed, now reading 06, 25, 23, 14, 30, 209. No, I whispered, horror washing over me. No, no, no. Jake looked at me, then at my arm, his face paling. What does it mean? Before I could answer, breaking news alerts started popping up on our screens. The Golden Gate Bridge had partially collapsed. The evacuation, rushed and chaotic due to the bomb threat, had caused panic. People had been trampled. Cars had collided in the frenzy to escape. And then, weakened by the earlier accident and the sudden shift in weight distribution, a section of the bridge had given way. We watched in stunned silence as the death toll climbed. 50, 100, 150. When it finally stopped, an hour later, the number on my arm changed for the last time. 06.25, 23, 15, 30, 209, 209 dead. More than double what it likely would have been without our intervention. I stumbled to the bathroom, violently ill. Jake followed, his face ashen. Ryan, he said softly, we couldn't have known. I looked up at him, tears streaming down my face. We made it worse, Jake. We tried to help and we made it so much worse. The weight of what we'd done crashed down on me. In our attempt to save lives, we had caused even more death. The faces of those 209 people, people who might have lived if we had done nothing, haunted me. I slumped against the bathroom wall, my whole body shaking with sobs. Jake sat down next to me, putting an arm around my shoulders. I can't do this anymore, I choked out between sobs. I can't bear this responsibility. Jake was quiet for a long moment before speaking. Maybe we're not meant to interfere. Maybe we're just meant to witness. I looked at him, anger flashing through my grief. Witness? What's the point of knowing if we can't do anything about it? He shook his head, looking as lost as I felt. I don't know, Ryan, I just don't know. We sat there on the cold bathroom floor for what felt like hours, the weight of our failed intervention pressing down on us. The euphoria of thinking we could make a difference had been replaced by a crushing sense of guilt and helplessness. As night fell, we moved back to the living room, neither of us able to sleep. The TV droned on in the background, replaying footage of the bridge collapse, showing images of grieving families, of heroic rescue efforts. I stared at my arm, at the numbers that had come to dictate my life. 209 lives lost, because of our actions, because of me. We can't try to stop it again, I said finally, breaking the heavy silence. We can't risk making things worse. Jake nodded slowly, the fight gone out of him. So what do we do? I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I was about to say. We document everything, every change, every event. We try to understand the pattern, the purpose behind it all, but we don't interfere, not ever again. As I spoke the words, I felt something shift inside me. The last vestiges of hope that I could somehow use this curse to save lives crumbled away. In its place, a grim determination took root. If I couldn't stop these tragedies from happening, I would bear witness to them. I would carry the weight of this knowledge, this terrible foresight, and ensure that every life lost was remembered. Jake looked at me, seeing the change in my demeanor. Okay, he said softly. Okay, we'll do it your way. As a new day dawned, casting long shadows across the cabin floor, I made a silent vow. I would unravel the mystery of the numbers, understand why this was happening to me, and maybe, just maybe, find a way to end it once and for all. But the cost of that knowledge, I was beginning to realize, might be more than I could bear. Days blurred into weeks, each one marked by the relentless changing of the numbers on my arm and the accompanying tragedies that followed. The cabin, once a refuge, had become a prison of our own making. The walls seemed to close in a little more each day, suffocating us with the weight of our terrible knowledge. I sat at the kitchen table, my eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep, meticulously updating our tragedy log. The latest entry read, 07:15:23, chemical plant explosion, Houston, TX. Death toll, 173. Jake emerged from the bedroom, his hair disheveled and his face gaunt. We'd both lost weight, our bodies mirroring the toll this ordeal was taking on our minds. "Any change?" he asked, his voice hoarse from disuse. I shook my head, not looking up from my notebook. "Not yet, but it's coming, it always does." Jake sighed, slumping into the chair across from me. "Ryan, we can't go on like this, we're falling apart." I finally looked up, meeting his concerned gaze. "What choice do we have? We can't stop it. We can't change it. All we can do is this." I gestured at the notebooks and laptops strewn across the table, our futile attempts to make sense of the senseless. "Maybe we should reach out to someone," Jake suggested, not for the first time. "A scientist or a government agency, someone who might be able to help us understand what's happening." I laughed bitterly. "And tell them what? That I have a magical tattoo that predicts disasters? They'd lock us up and throw away the key." Jake opened his mouth to argue, but was cut off by a sharp intake of breath from me. The familiar tingling sensation had started in my arm. "It's changing," I said, my voice tight with dread. We both watched as the numbers shifted and settled. 07:18:23, 11:45. 3 days from now," Jake murmured. "Any ideas where?" I shook my head, already pulling up our map of previous incidents. "No pattern I can see. It could be anywhere." As I started our usual routine of monitoring news sites and social media for any hints of the impending disaster, a thought struck me. A terrible, desperate thought. "Jake," I said slowly, "what if we could stop it before it starts?" He looked at me, confusion clear on his face. "What do you mean? We agreed not to interfere after last time." I stood up abruptly, pacing the small kitchen. I know, but hear me out. What if the problem isn't that we interfered, but how we interfered?" Jake's brow furrowed. "I'm not following." I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I was about to suggest. What if we remove the source of the predictions?" Realization dawned on Jake's face, quickly followed by horror. "Ryan, no, you can't be serious." "Think about it," I pressed on, my words tumbling out in a frantic rush. "Every disaster, every death, it all stems from this." I thrust my tattooed arm towards him. "If we get rid of it, maybe we stop it all." Jake stood up, grabbing my shoulders. "Listen to yourself. You're talking about cutting off your own arm." I shrugged off his grip, my mind racing. "It's just an arm, Jake. An arm for hundreds, maybe thousands of lives. Isn't that worth it?" "This is insane," Jake said, running his hands through his hair. "You're not thinking clearly. We're both exhausted, stressed beyond belief. We need to step back, take a breath." But I was beyond reason. The idea had taken hold, a lifeline in the sea of helplessness I'd been drowning in for weeks. "I have to try," I said, my voice breaking. "I can't live like this anymore. I can't keep watching people die, knowing I could have done something." Jake's face softened, concern replacing horror. "Ryan, please, let's think this through. There has to be another way." But I was already moving, rummaging through drawers until I found what I was looking for, a large, sharp hunting knife. Jake's eyes widened as I turned back to him, the blade glinting in the dim light of the cabin. "Ryan, put the knife down," he said slowly, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "We can figure this out together, okay? Just put the knife down." I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. "I'm sorry, Jake. I have to do this. I have to try." What happened next was a blur. Jake lunged for me, trying to wrestle the knife away. We struggled, our shouts echoing in the small cabin. In the chaos, I felt a sharp pain in my side. We both froze, looking down to see the knife embedded in my abdomen. "Oh, God," Jake whispered, his face pale with shock. "Ryan, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to." I stumbled backwards, my legs giving out as I slid down the wall. Jake was at my side in an instant, his hands pressing against the wound. "Stay with me, Ryan," he said, his voice shaking. "I'm going to get help." As Jake fumbled for his phone, my vision began to blur. The pain was intense, but strangely distant, as if happening to someone else. I looked down at my arm, at the numbers that had dictated my life for so long. They were changing. Through the haze of pain and encroaching unconsciousness, I watched as the numbers shifted. 07, 15, 23, 15, 17, 43, 1. One death. My death. I laughed, a wet, gurgling sound. "Jake?" I managed to croak out. He looked at me, phone pressed to his ear as he frantically gave directions to the 911 operator. "It worked," I said, a smile spreading across my face despite the pain. "We stopped it." Confusion flickered across Jake's face, quickly replaced by understanding as he glanced at my arm. "Ryan, no. Stay with me. Help is coming." But I could feel myself slipping away. The room was growing darker, the sounds more distant. As my eyes began to close, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. For the first time in weeks, the weight of foreknowledge was lifted from my shoulders. I don't know how long I was out. When I finally came to, it was to the steady beep of hospital monitors and the antiseptic smell of a recovery room. Jake was there, slumped in a chair by my bed, dark circles under his eyes. "Hey," I croaked, my throat dry and scratchy. Jake's head snapped up, relief flooding his features. "Ryan, thank God. How are you feeling?" "Like I've been stabbed," I said, attempting a weak smile. "What happened?" Jake filled me in. The knife had missed any vital organs, but I'd lost a lot of blood. Emergency services had arrived just in time, airlifting me to the nearest hospital. I'd been unconscious for 2 days. As Jake talked, I became aware of a dull ache in my left arm. I looked down, half expecting to see the familiar numbers. Instead, I saw clean, white bandages. "The tattoo," I said, interrupting Jake's explanation. Is it gone?" Jake's expression turned grave. "Ryan, there's something you need to know." He explained that while I was in surgery, news had broken of a massive earthquake in Mexico City. The death toll was still rising, but it was already in the hundreds. "It happened at 11:45 a.m., Jake said softly. "Exactly when the numbers predicted." The realization hit me like a physical blow. It hadn't worked. Despite everything, despite nearly dying, I hadn't changed anything. "But the numbers," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "They changed before I passed out. I saw them." Jake nodded. "I saw it too. But Ryan, I think that was just for you. Your own personal tragedy, separate from the bigger events." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of the world settle back onto my shoulders. When I opened them again, Jake was watching me with concern. "What do we do now?" I asked, feeling more lost than ever. Jake took my hand, squeezing it gently. "We keep going. We figure this out together. But no more desperate measures, okay? We can't lose you." As I lay there, the reality of our situation sinking in, I realized that this ordeal was far from over. The numbers might be hidden beneath bandages for now, but I knew they were still there, still changing, still predicting tragedies we couldn't prevent. But for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel alone. Jake was here, unwavering in his support despite everything we'd been through. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to face whatever came next. As I drifted off to sleep, the pain medication pulling me under, I made a silent promise to myself. I would unravel this mystery, understand why this was happening to me, and I would do it without losing myself in the process. The descent into darkness had been halted, at least for now. The climb back up would be long and difficult, but with Jake by my side, I felt a glimmer of hope. Whatever the numbers had in store for us next, we would face it together. The rhythmic beeping of hospital monitors had become a constant companion over the past week. I lay in the sterile white bed, my eyes fixed on the ceiling, counting the tiles for what felt like the 1,000th time. The bandages on my left arm itched, a constant reminder of what lay beneath. Jake entered the room, 2 cups of terrible hospital coffee in hand. "Any change?" he asked, setting 1 cup on my bedside table. I shook my head, not bothering to look. "Nothing. It's been quiet for days." Jake settled into the chair beside my bed, his face etched with worry. "Maybe that's a good thing, right? Maybe it's over." I let out a bitter laugh. When have we ever been that lucky? We sat in silence for a while, the weight of our shared experiences hanging heavy in the air. The doctors had been baffled by my case, a self-inflicted stab wound and a tattoo that seemed to appear and disappear at will. They'd run countless tests but found nothing out of the ordinary. To them, I was just another troubled patient with a penchant for self-harm. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the room, I felt it. A tingling sensation in my arm, so familiar yet somehow different. "Jake," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's happening." He was at my side in an instant, helping me unwrap the bandages. As the last layer fell away, we both gasped. The skin was clear, unblemished, no sign of the numbers that had haunted me for weeks. "It's gone," Jake breathed, disbelief evident in his voice. I stared at my arm, unable to process what I was seeing. After everything we'd been through, could it really be over just like that? As if in answer to my unspoken question, the tingling intensified. Before our eyes, numbers began to appear on my skin, fading in like a developing photograph. 081, 23, 10, 2 weeks from now, I murmured, a mix of dread and resignation washing over me. Jake squeezed my shoulder. "At least we have some time to prepare, right? Maybe we can figure out what it means before it happens." I nodded, though hope felt like a distant memory. "Yeah, maybe." The next morning, against medical advice, I checked myself out of the hospital. Jake protested, but I was adamant. "We can't do what we need to do from here," I argued as we walked to his car. "We need resources, privacy. We need to get back to the cabin." Jake sighed, but didn't argue further. As we drove through the city, I couldn't help but look at the people on the streets, in their cars, going about their daily lives. How many of them would be affected by whatever was coming in 2 weeks? How many lives would be changed forever? The drive back to the cabin was long and mostly silent. I spent the time staring at my arm, watching the seconds tick by on my skin. It was surreal, seeing time literally pass on my body. As we pulled up to the cabin, I felt a strange mix of comfort and unease. This place had been our refuge and our prison. Now it would be our war room. "Okay," Jake said as we settled in, unpacking the supplies we'd picked up on the way. "Where do we start?" I took a deep breath, trying to organize my thoughts. "We need to approach this systematically. We have the date and time, but no location. Let's start by looking at patterns from previous events." We spent the next few days poring over our notes, creating timelines and mapping out every disaster we'd witnessed. We barely slept, fueled by coffee and the desperate need to make sense of it all. On the 3rd day, as I was pinning another string to our increasingly complex wall map, something clicked. "Jake," I called out, my voice tight with excitement. "I think I've got something." He hurried over, eyes wide. "What is it?" I pointed to the map. "Look at the pattern. Each event has been progressively larger in scale, and the time between events has been getting shorter. Jake's brow furrowed as he studied the map. So you think whatever's coming next is going to be big, I finished. Bigger than anything we've seen before. The realization hung heavy in the air between us. The implications were staggering. We need to warn someone, Jake said, voicing what we were both thinking. I shook my head. Who would believe us? We'd sound crazy. Maybe, Jake conceded, but we have to try. We can't sit by and watch thousands of people die if there's even a chance we could prevent it. I looked down at my arm at the numbers that now read 07.28, 23, 14, 37, and 22. Just over 3 days left. Okay, I said finally. But we need to be smart about this. We can't go in guns blazing like last time. We spent the next day crafting our approach. We decided to reach out to a professor of theoretical physics at MIT, Dr. Elena Rossi. Her work on quantum entanglement and temporal anomalies made her our best bet for someone who might be open to our impossible story. With shaking hands, I dialed her office number. Dr. Rossi's office, a crisp voice answered. Hello, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. My name is Ryan. I need to speak with Dr. Rossi about a matter of utmost urgency. It's regarding temporal anomalies. There was a pause on the other end. I'm sorry, but Dr. Rossi is extremely busy. If you'd like to schedule an appointment. Please, I interrupted, desperation creeping into my voice. Tell her it's about predicting the future. Tell her I can prove it. Another long pause, then, hold please. Jake and I exchanged nervous glances as we waited. After what felt like an eternity, a new voice came on the line. This is Dr. Rossi. I understand you have something to discuss about predicting the future? I took a deep breath. Dr. Rossi, what I'm about to tell you is going to sound impossible, but I swear to you, it's the truth. Over the next hour, I laid out our story. The mysterious tattoo, the changing numbers, the disasters we'd witnessed. To her credit, Dr. Rossi listened without interruption. When I finished, there was a long silence. Finally, she spoke. Mr. Ryan, what you're describing defies all known laws of physics. My heart sank. I know how it sounds, but... However, she continued, I've learned in my field that the impossible often simply means we don't understand it yet. I'm intrigued. Can you come to my lab? I'd like to run some tests. Hope, fragile but undeniable, blossomed in my chest. Yes, absolutely. When? How about tomorrow? First thing in the morning. As I hung up the phone, Jake looked at me expectantly. Well? A small smile, the first in what felt like ages, tugged at my lips. We're going to MIT. The next morning found us in Dr. Rossi's lab, surrounded by equipment I couldn't begin to understand. She ran test after test, measuring everything from my brainwaves to the electromagnetic field around my arm. As the day wore on, I could see the excitement growing in her eyes. This is remarkable, she muttered, poring over readouts. The quantum fluctuations around your arm are like nothing I've ever seen. What does it mean? I asked, hardly daring to hope. Dr. Rossi looked up, her eyes shining with the thrill of discovery. It means, Ryan, that you're not crazy. Something is definitely happening here. Something that defies our current understanding of physics. Relief washed over me. After weeks of doubt and fear, to have someone, a renowned scientist no less, validate our experience was overwhelming. So you believe us about the predictions? Jake asked. Dr. Rossi nodded slowly. I'm inclined to, yes. And if you're right about the pattern, about the increasing scale of events, we need to do something, I finished. She agreed. I have some contacts in the government, in agencies that deal with large-scale threats. With my backing, they might listen. As Dr. Rossi made calls, Jake and I waited anxiously. The numbers on my arm now read 07.31, 23.09, 12:47. Less than 24 hours left. Finally, Dr. Rossi returned. They're sending a team. They'll be here in an hour. The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. Government agents arrived asking questions, running their own tests. I repeated our story what felt like 100 times. As the clock ticked closer to 10 a.m., the tension in the room was palpable. Everyone's eyes were glued to my arm, watching the seconds count down. 0731 2309 5955, 0731 2309 5956, 0731 2309 5957, 0731 2309 5958, 0731 2309 5959, 0801 2310 0. A collective gasp filled the room as the date changed, and then chaos erupted. Phones started ringing. Agents were shouting into radios. Dr. Rossi's computer screens were flashing with incoming data. Massive seismic activity detected in the Pacific Northwest. Someone called out. Reports of a tsunami warning for the entire West Coast. Another voice added. As the magnitude of the event became clear, I felt a strange mix of vindication and horror. We'd been right. But at what cost? An agent approached me, his face grave. We need your help. If you can predict these events, you might be able to help us minimize casualties. I looked at Jake, seeing my own determination reflected in his eyes. We nodded in unison. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a true sense of purpose. We couldn't stop these disasters from happening, but maybe, just maybe, we could help save lives. As we were ushered into a makeshift command center, I glanced down at my arm one last time. The numbers were already changing, predicting the next event. But this time, we wouldn't face it alone. A glimmer of hope had appeared on the horizon. It wasn't much, but it was something to hold on to as we stepped into the unknown. The makeshift command center buzzed with frantic energy. Screens flickered with real-time data, showing the devastation unfolding along the West Coast. The rhythmic beeping of my arm's changing numbers was drowned out by the cacophony of ringing phones and urgent voices. I stood in the center of it all, feeling simultaneously crucial and utterly helpless. Jake squeezed my shoulder, a silent reminder that I wasn't alone in this chaos. Mr. Walker, a stern voice cut through the noise. I turned to see a tall, imposing woman in a crisp suit approaching. I'm Director Sarah Hawkins, Department of Homeland Security. We need to talk. She led us to a quieter corner of the room, her piercing gaze never leaving my arm. Dr. Rossi has briefed me on your unique situation. I'm going to be blunt. We need your cooperation to save lives. I nodded, swallowing hard. Of course, whatever I can do. Good, she said, her tone softening slightly. Now tell me everything you know about the next event. I glanced at my arm, the numbers now reading 08.15, 23.14 to 30. It's happening in 2 weeks, August 15th at 2:30 p.m., but I don't know where or what it will be. Director Hawkins frowned. That's not much to go on. We need more. Jake stepped forward. We've been tracking patterns. Each event has been progressively larger in scale and impact, given what just happened on the West Coast. The next one could be catastrophic. Hawkins finished, her face grim. All right, here's what we're going to do. We're setting up a task force dedicated to analyzing and preparing for these events. You two will be at the center of it. Over the next few days, Jake and I found ourselves in a whirlwind of activity. We were flown to a secure facility outside of Washington, D.C., where we met with scientists, analysts, and government officials from various agencies. Dr. Rossi joined us, her expertise proving invaluable as we tried to unravel the mystery of my condition. She set up a lab dedicated to studying the quantum fluctuations around my arm, hoping to find a scientific explanation for the inexplicable. 1 week before the next predicted event, we gathered for a briefing. The room was tense, filled with the weight of what was at stake. All right, people, Director Hawkins began, her voice commanding attention. What do we know? A young analyst named Tom stepped forward. Based on the pattern of previous events and their escalating nature, we believe the next incident will likely be a major terrorist attack or a significant natural disaster. We've narrowed down potential targets to major cities in Europe or the Middle East, given the time of day indicated. I listened, a knot forming in my stomach. The clinical way they discussed potential mass casualties made me feel sick. Ryan, Dr. Rossi said gently, noticing my discomfort. Have you noticed any changes in the way the numbers appear or behave? I shook my head. No, they've been consistent, but I hesitated, unsure how to articulate what I'd been feeling. But what? Hawkins pressed. It's just a feeling, I said slowly. But each time the numbers change, I feel something. A pull, like I'm somehow connected to what's about to happen. The room fell silent, all eyes on me. Dr. Rossi leaned forward, her eyes shining with scientific curiosity. Ryan, why didn't you mention this before? This could be crucial to understanding the mechanism behind the predictions. I shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention. I didn't think it was important. It's just a feeling, not anything concrete. Every piece of information is important, Hawkins said firmly. From now on, I want you to report any sensations or feelings you have, no matter how insignificant they might seem. The meeting continued, with various experts presenting their theories and preparations. As they talked, I found my mind wandering, thinking about all the lives that hung in the balance. The weight of responsibility was crushing. Later that night, unable to sleep, I wandered the facility's halls. I found Jake in the cafeteria, nursing a cup of coffee. "Can't sleep either?" he asked as I sat across from him. I shook my head. "How did we end up here, Jake? A month ago we were just two guys on a Vegas trip. Now we're at the center of whatever this is." Jake sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I ask myself that every day. But Ryan, we're doing the right thing. We're trying to save lives." "Are we?" I asked, voicing the doubt that had been gnawing at me. "What if we're making things worse? What if by trying to prevent these events we're somehow causing them?" Jake reached across the table, gripping my arm. "Hey, don't go down that road. We can't think like that. We have to believe we can make a difference." I nodded, not entirely convinced but grateful for his unwavering support. As the days ticked by, the tension in the facility ratcheted up. My arm became the focus of constant attention, with scientists monitoring every fluctuation and change. 3 days before the predicted event, something changed. I was in Dr. Rossi's lab, undergoing yet another series of tests, when a sharp pain shot through my arm. "Ah!" I cried out, clutching my forearm. Dr. Rossi was at my side in an instant. "Ryan, what's happening?" I looked down at my arm, my eyes widening in shock. The numbers were changing rapidly, flickering between different sequences faster than I could read them. "Get Director Hawkins," I managed to say through gritted teeth. "Something's wrong." Within minutes, the lab was filled with people. Hawkins barked orders. Analysts scrambled to make sense of the changing numbers, and through it all, the pain in my arm intensified. Suddenly, as quickly as it had started, it stopped. The numbers settled, now reading 8, 13, 23, 09, 47 cows. That's tomorrow," Jake said, his voice filled with disbelief. The room erupted into chaos. Hawkins was on her phone immediately, mobilizing resources. Analysts ran to their stations trying to predict where the event might occur. In the midst of the frenzy, I felt it, the pull, stronger than ever before. "Washington," I said, my voice cutting through the noise. Everyone turned to look at me. "It's going to happen in Washington." "D.C.?" Hawkins asked sharply. I nodded, feeling more certain with each passing second. "Yes, I can feel it. Whatever's going to happen, it's here. In the capital." Hawkins didn't hesitate. She began issuing orders, coordinating with local law enforcement and emergency services. The facility transformed into a hive of activity, preparing for an unknown threat in less than 24 hours. As the night wore on, I found myself standing by a window, looking out at the Washington Monument illuminated in the distance. Jake joined me, his presence a comfort in the storm of uncertainty. "How are you holding up?" he asked quietly. I shook my head, unable to find the words to express the turmoil inside me. "Jake, what if we can't stop it? What if all of this," I gestured at the frantic activity behind us, "is for nothing?" Jake was quiet for a moment before responding. Then we'll have done everything we could. Sometimes that's all we can do. As dawn broke over the Capitol, casting long shadows across the National Mall, I felt a sense of foreboding settle over me. In just a few hours, something was going to happen that could change everything, and somehow, I was at the center of it all. I looked down at my arm, the numbers a constant reminder of the ticking clock. 08:10 or 13:23, 08:15 to 37. Less than 2 hours to go. Director Hawkins approached, her face etched with determination. "Ryan, we're moving out. We've got teams positioned across the city, but we need you there. If you can sense anything, any change, it could make all the difference." I nodded, steeling myself for what was to come. As we prepared to leave the facility, Jake pulled me aside. "Whatever happens out there," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I've got your back. We're in this together till the end." I gripped his shoulder, grateful beyond words for his friendship and loyalty. "Together," I agreed. As we stepped out into the morning sun, the streets of Washington, D.C. bustling with unsuspecting citizens going about their day, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into something bigger than we could possibly imagine. The numbers on my arm seemed to pulse with an ominous energy, a countdown to an event that could change the course of history. With each step towards the heart of the Capitol, the pull in my chest grew stronger. Whatever was coming, we were racing against time to stop it. And as the seconds ticked away, I realized that the next few hours would determine not just the fate of countless lives, but perhaps the very nature of my connection to these mysterious predictions. The final countdown had begun, and we were the only ones who could see it coming. The streets of Washington, D.C. were a maze of controlled chaos. Police barricades blocked off major intersections, and confused tourists mingled with stern-faced government agents. Our convoy of black SUVs wove through the mess, sirens blaring. I sat in the back of the lead vehicle, sandwiched between Jake and Dr. Rossi. Director Hawkins was in the front passenger seat, barking orders into a secure phone line. The numbers on my arm now read 08.1323093012. Less than 17 minutes to go. "Ryan," Dr. Rossi said, her voice tense, "any changes in what you're feeling?" I closed my eyes, trying to focus on the strange pull in my chest. "It's stronger," I said after a moment. "Like it's tugging me forward." Hawkins turned in her seat, her piercing gaze locking onto mine. "Forward where?" "We need a location, Ryan." I shook my head, frustration building. "I don't know exactly, just, ahead. North, maybe." "North," Hawkins repeated, turning back to relay the information to her team. As we approached the National Mall, the pull intensified. "Here," I said suddenly, my voice sounding strange even to my own ears. "It's here. Close." The convoy screeched to a halt. We piled out onto the street, the Washington Monument looming over us. The area was crawling with agents and police officers, all on high alert. 10 minutes, Jake murmured, glancing at my arm. Hawkins was already organizing search teams, sending them to scour the area for anything suspicious. Dr. Rossi hovered nearby, her instruments beeping as she took readings of the quantum fluctuations around my arm. "The energy readings are off the charts," she muttered, her brow furrowed in concentration. I barely heard her. The pull was overwhelming now, urging me forward. Without thinking, I started walking. "Ryan," Jake called out, hurrying to catch up. "Where are you going?" "I don't know," I said, my feet carrying me forward as if of their own accord. "But it's this way. I can feel it." We made our way across the grassy expanse of the National Mall, agents fanning out around us. As we neared the base of the Washington Monument, I saw them, a group of men acting suspiciously near one of the security checkpoints. "There," I said, pointing. "It's them." Hawkins didn't hesitate. "Move in," she commanded into her radio. What happened next was a blur of motion and sound. Agents converged on the suspects, who immediately scattered. Shouts filled the air, followed by the sharp crack of gunfire. "Get down!" Jake yelled, pulling me to the ground as bullets whizzed overhead. Chaos erupted around us. Tourists screamed and ran for cover. More shots were fired. Through it all, I felt the pull stronger than ever, urging me towards the monument. "We have to get closer," I shouted to Jake over the din. He looked at me like I was crazy. "Are you insane? We'll get killed." But I was already moving, crawling on my hands and knees towards the base of the monument. Jake cursed but followed, covering me as best he could. As we neared the structure, I saw one of the suspects break away from the others, sprinting towards the monument with a large backpack. Time seemed to slow down as realization hit me. "Bomb," I whispered, then louder. "Bomb! He's got a bomb." Agents turned, their weapons trained on the running man. But he was too close to the monument, too close to the crowds of panicking civilians. They couldn't risk taking the shot. I looked down at my arm. Oro 8, 13, 23, Oro 9, 46, 55, 5 seconds. In that moment, I knew what I had to do. The pull wasn't just leading me to the event, it was leading me to stop it. "I'm sorry, Jake," I said, meeting his eyes one last time. Before he could react, I was on my feet, sprinting towards the bomber. I heard Jake's anguished cry behind me, but I didn't look back. There was no time. 3 seconds. I collided with the bomber just as he reached for his backpack. We went down in a tangle of limbs, rolling across the grass. 2 seconds. I grappled with him, trying to pin his arms. He was strong, fueled by fanatical determination. But so was I. 1 second. My hand found the detonator in his grip. With all my strength, I wrenched it away, feeling something in my wrist snap with the effort. 0. I waited for the explosion, for the end. But it didn't come. The detonator lay inert in my trembling hand. For a moment, everything was silent. Then the world rushed back in a cacophony of shouts and running feet. Agents swarmed around us, securing the bomber and the backpack. I lay on the grass, staring up at the clear blue sky, my heart pounding in my chest. We'd done it. We'd stopped it. Jake was suddenly there, his face a mix of relief and fury. "You idiot," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "You goddamn idiot." I tried to smile, but it came out as more of a grimace. "Did we get them all?" Jake nodded, helping me sit up. "Yeah, we got them. All 6 terrorists in custody. No casualties." Relief washed over me, quickly followed by a wave of exhaustion. I looked down at my arm, expecting to see the familiar numbers, but they were gone. "Jake," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "The numbers. They're gone." Before he could respond, a searing pain shot through my arm. I cried out, clutching at it as the world spun around me. "Ryan!" Jake's voice sounded distant, fading. "We need a medic here." The last thing I saw before darkness took me was a swarm of concerned faces hovering above, and Jake's hand gripping mine tightly. I drifted in and out of consciousness, catching snippets of conversation and flashes of sterile hospital rooms. At one point, I thought I heard Dr. Rossi's excited voice talking about unprecedented quantum entanglement, but it faded away before I could make sense of it. When I finally came to fully, I was in a private hospital room. Jake was dozing in a chair beside my bed, looking like he hadn't slept in days. "Jake," I croaked, my throat dry. He startled awake, relief flooding his features. "Ryan, thank God. How are you feeling?" "Like I wrestled a terrorist and a bomb," I said, attempting a weak smile. "How long was I out?" 3 days, Jake replied, pouring me a glass of water. "You had us worried, man." As I sipped the water, memories came flooding back. The chase, the fight, the moment I thought it was all over. "The bombing," I said suddenly. "We stopped it, right? That wasn't a dream?" Jake nodded, a grim smile on his face. "We stopped it. 6 terrorists in custody, bomb defused safely. You're a hero, Ryan." I shook my head, uncomfortable with the label. "I just did what I had to do. What about—" I trailed off, looking down at my arm. It was heavily bandaged. Jake's expression turned serious. The numbers disappeared right after you tackled the bomber. Dr. Rossi's been running tests, trying to figure out what happened. She thinks that by directly intervening in the event you were predicting, you somehow broke the connection. I let that sink in. The numbers were gone. The burden I'd been carrying for weeks had been lifted. But at what cost? Ryan, Jake said softly, there's something else you should know. The tone of his voice made my stomach drop. What is it? Jake took a deep breath. The strain of what happened, the physical trauma combined with whatever quantum weirdness was going on, it did some damage to your arm. I tried to flex my fingers, but they barely responded. A cold fear gripped me. How bad? The doctors aren't sure yet, Jake said, his voice gentle. There's a lot of nerve damage. They're hopeful that with therapy you might regain some function, but he didn't need to finish the sentence. I understood the implications. My left arm, the arm that had borne those fateful numbers, might never be the same again. A knock at the door interrupted us. Director Hawkins entered, followed by Dr. Rossi and a man in a crisp military uniform I didn't recognize. Mr. Walker, Hawkins said. Her usual stern demeanor softened slightly. It's good to see you awake. How are you feeling? I've been better, I replied honestly. But I hear we got the bad guys, so I can't complain too much. The man in uniform stepped forward. Mr. Walker, I'm General Frank Hollister. On behalf of the United States government, I want to thank you for your extraordinary service. Your actions saved countless lives. I nodded, uncomfortable with the praise. I just did what anyone would do in that situation. Not anyone, Hollister said firmly. What you did was above and beyond, which is why I'm here. We'd like to offer you a position. I blinked in surprise. A position? Hawkins took over. We're forming a new task force dedicated to predicting and preventing large-scale threats. Your experience would be invaluable. But the numbers are gone, I protested. I can't predict anything anymore. Dr. Rossi stepped forward, her eyes shining with excitement. That's not entirely true, Ryan. The quantum entanglement that allowed you to predict those events, it's still there, just different now. I believe that with proper training and study, you might be able to access those abilities again, but in a more controlled manner. My head was spinning. It was too much to process. I don't know what to say. Jake squeezed my shoulder. You don't have to decide anything now. Take some time to recover, to think about it. I nodded gratefully, suddenly feeling very tired. The others seemed to notice, and began to file out of the room with promises to return later. As the door closed behind them, I turned to Jake. What do you think I should do? He was quiet for a moment before responding. I think you have a chance to do something truly extraordinary, Ryan. To use what happened to you to make a real difference in the world. But it has to be your choice. I looked down at my bandaged arm, thinking about everything that had happened. The terror, the pain, the lives saved. Could I really go back to a normal life after all of this? As if reading my thoughts, Jake added softly, Whatever you decide, I've got your back. Partners, remember? I smiled, feeling a warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with quantum entanglement or predictions. Partners, I agreed. As I drifted off to sleep, my mind was filled not with visions of disasters to come, but of possibilities. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, I felt something I'd almost forgotten. Hope. The numbers on my arm were gone, but maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something even more important. The rhythmic beeping of hospital monitors had become a familiar soundtrack to my days. Sunlight streamed through the window, casting long shadows across the sterile room. I sat on the edge of the bed, my left arm cradled in a sling, staring at the mirror on the opposite wall. The man looking back at me was a stranger. Gaunt face, hollow eyes, a week's worth of stubble. I barely recognized myself. A knock on the door pulled me from my reverie. Come in, I called out. my voice hoarse from disuse. Jake entered carrying a duffel bag and wearing a cautious smile. "Hey, partner, ready to blow this popsicle stand?" I nodded, relief washing over me. After weeks of tests, debriefings, and physical therapy, I was finally being released. More than ready. As Jake helped me gather my things, I couldn't help but notice the way he kept glancing at my arm. "It's okay to ask, you know," I said softly. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "How bad is it, really?" I flexed my fingers, watching as they responded sluggishly to the command. "Better than they initially thought. I've got about 60% function back. The doctors are optimistic I'll regain more with time and therapy." Jake nodded, his expression a mix of relief and lingering concern. "And the other thing?" I knew what he was referring to. The quantum entanglement, the possibility of accessing my predictive abilities again. "Nothing concrete yet," I admitted. "Dr. Rossi says it's there, but dormant, like a muscle I haven't learned how to flex." We lapsed into silence as we finished packing. As we were about to leave, Dr. Rossi herself appeared in the doorway. "Ah, I'm glad I caught you before you left," she said, her eyes bright with that familiar scientific curiosity. "I wanted to discuss your ongoing treatment plan." I tensed, suddenly feeling trapped. Jake, sensing my discomfort, stepped in. "Can it wait, Doc? Ryan's been cooped up in here for weeks. He needs some fresh air, some normalcy." Dr. Rossi looked like she wanted to argue, but something in Jake's expression made her reconsider. "Of course," she said, her tone softening. "Take some time to decompress. But please, Ryan, don't forget about our appointment next week. It's crucial we continue monitoring your condition." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. As we left the hospital, the weight of everything that had happened, everything that was still unfolding, pressed down on me. The drive to my apartment was quiet, the city passing by in a blur of familiar yet somehow alien landscapes. When we arrived, I hesitated at the door. "You okay?" Jake asked, concern etching his features. I took a deep breath. "Yeah, it feels like a lifetime ago that I was last here, like I'm walking into someone else's life." Jake squeezed my shoulder. "It's still your life, Ryan. Just with some new chapters." As we entered the apartment, I was struck by how unchanged everything was. Books still scattered on the coffee table, dishes in the sink, my running shoes by the door. It was as if the past few months had never happened. But they had happened. The sling on my arm and the haunted look in my eyes and every reflective surface were testament to that. Jake busied himself making coffee while I wandered the rooms, reacquainting myself with my own space. When I returned to the living room, he was sitting on the couch, 2 steaming mugs on the table in front of him. "So," he said as I sat down, "what's next?" I sighed, cradling the warm mug in my good hand. "I don't know, Jake. Part of me wants to forget any of this ever happened, go back to my old job, my old life. But," Jake prompted gently. "But I can't," I admitted. "Not really. Even if I wanted to, there's this." I gestured vaguely with my injured arm. "This connection, this ability. It's part of me now, whether I like it or not." Jake nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Have you thought more about Hawkins' offer? The task force?" I had thought about it. Obsessed over it, really, during the long nights in the hospital. "I'm scared, Jake," I confessed, my voice barely above a whisper. "What if I can't control it? What if I make a mistake and people die because of me?" "Hey," Jake said firmly, leaning forward. "You've already saved countless lives. Whatever happens next, that doesn't change." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Turn on the news now." With a sense of dread, I reached for the remote. The TV flickered to life, showing a press conference in progress. My blood ran cold as I recognized the man at the podium. It was the lead terrorist from the Washington Monument attack. And though they may have stopped us this time, they cannot stop the inevitable, he was saying, his eyes burning with fanatical intensity. Our cause is just, and we will not rest until we have brought this corrupt system to its knees. To the man who interfered with our holy mission, your days are numbered. We are coming for you, and for all those who stand in our way. The press conference devolved into chaos as reporters shouted questions and security rushed to remove the terrorist. Jake muted the TV, turning to me with a grim expression. "Ryan," he said slowly, "I think things just got a lot more complicated." I nodded, my mind racing, the relative peace of the past few weeks shattered, replaced by a renewed sense of urgency and danger. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was Director Hawkins. "My office, 1 hour. This isn't a request." I showed the message to Jake, who let out a low whistle. Looks like decision time came early. As we prepared to leave, I caught sight of myself in the hallway mirror. The man looking back at me was still gaunt, still haunted, but there was something else there now. A spark of determination, of purpose. "Jake," I said, turning to my friend, my partner through all of this, "I think I know what I have to do." He nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I figured you might. You know I'm with you, right? Whatever you decide." The drive to Hawkins' office was tense, the weight of what was to come hanging heavy in the air. As we navigated through the security checkpoints, I couldn't help but feel like I was crossing a threshold, leaving behind any chance at a normal life. Hawkins' office was a hive of activity when we arrived. Agents rushed back and forth, phones rang incessantly, and screens displayed news feeds from around the world. "Walker," Hawkins called out as soon as she saw us. "In here now." We followed her into a private conference room. Dr. Rossi was already there, along with General Hollister and a few other serious-looking individuals I didn't recognize. "I assume you've seen the news," Hawkins said without preamble. I nodded. "The terrorist. He threatened me directly." "Not just you," Hollister interjected. "He threatened the entire system. We have credible intelligence suggesting they're planning something big, bigger than the Washington attack." Dr. Rossi leaned forward, her eyes intense. "Ryan, I know we agreed to give you time, but we're out of time. We need your abilities. We need you to help us predict and prevent whatever they're planning." I looked around the room, at the expectant faces of these powerful people. Then I looked at Jake, my constant through all of this. Taking a deep breath, I made my decision. "I'll do it," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "I'll join your task force, but I have conditions." Hawkins raised an eyebrow. "Go on." "First, Jake's in. Full partner, full clearance. I don't do this without him." Jake's eyes widened in surprise, but he nodded in agreement. "Second," I continued, "I want full transparency. No hidden agendas, no using my abilities for anything other than saving lives." Hawkins and Hollister exchanged glances before nodding. "And third," I said, my voice softening slightly, "I want help. Not just with controlling these abilities, but dealing with them, mentally, emotionally. I can't be effective if I'm falling apart inside." There was a moment of silence as they considered my terms. Finally, Hawkins spoke. "Agreed. Welcome to the team, Mr. Walker." As hands were shaken and paperwork was produced, I felt a strange mix of trepidation and resolve. This wasn't the life I had imagined for myself, but it was the life I now had. A life where my curse could become a gift, where the numbers that had once terrified me could now save lives. Jake bumped my shoulder gently. "You okay?" he asked quietly. I nodded, managing a small smile. "Yeah, I think I am. Or I will be." As we left the conference room, stepping into a new chapter of our lives, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The numbers on my arm might be gone, but their echo remained. A constant reminder of the responsibility I now carried. Whatever came next, whatever challenges we faced, I knew one thing for certain. We would face them together. And maybe, just maybe, We could make a difference in this unpredictable, sometimes terrifying world. The aftermath of one chapter had become the prologue to another, and as we walked out into the bustling corridors of power, I felt ready to write this new story, one prediction at a time. The soft hum of advanced technology filled the air as I stood in the center of what the team had affectionately dubbed the prediction room. Sleek monitors lined the walls, displaying a dizzying array of data streams, news feeds, and analytical models. At the heart of it all was a raised platform where I now stood, electrodes attached to my temples and left arm. 6 months had passed since I'd agreed to join the task force. 6 months of rigorous training, of learning to harness the strange quantum connection that still lingered within me. 6 months of successes and failures, of nightmares and breakthroughs. "Okay, Ryan." Dr. Rossi's voice came through the speakers. "We're going to start the simulation. Remember, focus on the feeling, not the numbers. Let the images come to you naturally." I took a deep breath, closing my eyes. The familiar tingle began in my left arm, spreading through my body. It was nothing like the harsh, demanding pull of the numbers that used to appear on my skin. This was subtler, more controlled. Suddenly, flashes of images flooded my mind. A crowded street, the glint of sunlight on metal, a clock tower showing 3:15. "I see. A city," I said, my voice strained with concentration. "European, I think. Old buildings, cobblestone streets. There's a large square with a clock tower." "Good, Ryan," Dr. Rossi encouraged. "Can you see any specific landmarks? Anything that might help us identify the location?" I focused harder, trying to bring the images into sharper relief. "The clock tower, it's ornate, with astronomical features. I think it might be Prague, the old town square." A flurry of activity erupted beyond my closed eyelids as analysts rushed to corroborate my vision. "He's right," I heard Jake's voice, pride evident in his tone. "The description matches the Prague astronomical clock in the old town square." "Time frame?" Director Hawkins's crisp voice cut through the chatter. I concentrated on the clock in my vision. 3 days from now, July 18th, 3:15 p.m. local time. As I opened my eyes, the room came back into focus. Jake was grinning at me from behind a bank of computers, while Dr. Rossi was already poring over the data from the session. Director Hawkins stood at the center of it all, her face impassive, but her eyes glinting with approval. "Well done, Walker," she said. "Team, I want a full analysis of potential threats in Prague on that date. Coordinate with Czech authorities. Let's prevent whatever's coming." As the room burst into action, Jake approached the platform, helping me remove the electrodes. "You're getting better at this," he said, his voice low. "How do you feel?" I flexed my left hand, the movement still slightly stiff, but much improved. "Tired," I admitted, "but good. It's getting easier to control, to direct the visions." Jake nodded, understanding in his eyes. He'd been there through every step of this journey, my rock when the weight of this new responsibility threatened to crush me. "Mr. Walker," Director Hawkins called, interrupting our moment. "A word, please." I followed her to a quiet corner of the room, curiosity and a hint of apprehension building in my gut. "Your progress is impressive," she began, her tone businesslike. "Doctor, Rossi believes you're ready for field work." My heart skipped a beat. Field work. It was what we'd been working towards, but the reality of it sent a shiver down my spine. "Are you sure I'm ready?" I asked, voicing my doubts. Hawkins fixed me with her penetrating gaze. "You've prevented 3 major incidents in the past month alone, Walker. Your predictions have saved countless lives. But now we need you on the ground, where you can provide real-time intel." I nodded slowly, processing her words. "When do we leave?" "Tomorrow," she replied. "You and Stevens will fly to Prague with a small team. Officially, you're there as cultural attachés to the U.S. Embassy. Unofficially, we're there to stop whatever's coming," I finished. Hawkins nodded. Exactly, be ready at 0600. As she walked away, Jake approached, concern etched on his face. Everything okay? I took a deep breath. We're going to Prague. Tomorrow. Jake's eyes widened. Field work? Are you sure you're... Ready? I interrupted with a wry smile. That seems to be the question of the day. But ready or not, it's happening. The next 24 hours passed in a blur of preparations, briefings, and restless anticipation. Before I knew it, we were touching down in Prague, the city's spires and red-tiled roofs sprawling beneath us. Our team set up in a nondescript apartment overlooking the old town square. As Jake and I stood by the window watching tourists mill about below, the weight of our mission settled heavily on my shoulders. Talk to me, Jake said, nudging my arm gently. What's going on in that predictive brain of yours? I sighed, running a hand through my hair. I'm scared, Jake. What if I'm wrong? What if I miss something and people die because of it? Jake turned to face me, his expression serious. Listen to me. You've trained for this. You're not alone in this. We've got a whole team backing us up. And most importantly, you've got me. Partners, remember? I managed a small smile. Partners. As the fateful hour approached, tension in our makeshift command center reached a fever pitch. I stood by the window, my eyes closed, reaching out with my senses, trying to pinpoint the threat. Suddenly, a vision hit me with startling clarity. There! I shouted, my eyes snapping open. The cafe on the corner, man in a blue jacket. He's got a bomb. Our team sprang into action, relaying the information to local authorities. Within minutes, plain-clothed officers were converging on the cafe. But something felt off. The tingling in my arm intensified, and another vision flashed before my eyes. Wait, I called out, my voice tight with urgency. It's a diversion. The real threat is... I stumbled, overwhelmed by the intensity of the vision. Jake was at my side in an instant, steadying me. Ryan, what do you see? He asked, his voice anchoring me. The clock tower, I gasped. There's a sniper in the clock tower. High-ranking target approaching from the south side of the square. Jake relayed the information as I fought to stay upright, the visions coming faster and more intensely than ever before. What happened next was a blur of action and adrenaline. Our team coordinated with local forces, simultaneously neutralizing the bomb threat and the sniper. As the dust settled, we learned that we'd prevented an assassination attempt on a visiting diplomat, an act that could have sparked an international crisis. Hours later, as we sat in a secure debriefing room at the U.S. Embassy, the full impact of what we'd accomplished began to sink in. You did good out there, Walker, Director Hawkins said, a rare note of approval in her voice. Both of you, she added, nodding to Jake. Dr. Rossi was practically vibrating with excitement. The way you handled multiple visions, the clarity of the predictions, it's unprecedented. We're making real progress in understanding the nature of your abilities. I nodded, feeling a mix of exhaustion and a strange sense of fulfillment. It felt different this time, I admitted. More connected, like I was tapping into something bigger than myself. As the debriefing concluded and we prepared to head back to our hotel, Jake pulled me aside. How are you really doing? He asked, concern evident in his eyes. I took a moment to consider the question. I'm okay, I said slowly. Better than okay, actually. For the first time since this all started, I feel like I'm where I'm supposed to be, doing what I'm meant to do. Jake smiled, squeezing my shoulder. That's good to hear. Just remember, you don't have to carry this burden alone. We're in this together. As we stepped out into the warm Prague evening, the city alive with lights and the chatter of tourists, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The numbers that had once been a curse had led me to this moment, to a purpose I never could have imagined. I looked down at my left arm, the scars from my earlier ordeal barely visible now. The numbers were gone, but their echo remained, not as a burden, but as a reminder of how far I'd come. So, Jake said as we walked. Ready for whatever comes next? I smiled, feeling the familiar tingle of potential visions at the edge of my consciousness. You know what? I think I am. As we made our way through the cobblestone streets, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. There would be more challenges, more threats to face. But for the first time, I felt truly equipped to meet them. The man who had woken up in Las Vegas with mysterious numbers on his arm was gone. In his place stood someone new, someone who had found purpose in the unexplainable, who had turned a curse into a gift. Whatever the future held, whatever visions might come, I was ready. With Jake by my side and a team supporting us, we would face each prediction, each potential disaster, and do our best to make a difference. As the Prague astronomical clock chimed in the distance, marking the passage of time, I felt a surge of anticipation for the journey ahead. This new beginning was not an ending, but a continuation, a chance to write a new story, one prediction at a time. The numbers on my arm were gone, but their legacy lived on. And in that legacy, I had found not just purpose, but hope. Hope for a future where the unexplainable could be harnessed for good, where foreknowledge could save lives, and where the weight of responsibility could be shared. As Jake and I disappeared into the Prague night, ready for whatever mission awaited us next, I couldn't help but feel that the most important prediction had already come true. The prediction that out of chaos and fear, something meaningful and powerful could emerge. The next chapter was waiting to be written, and for the first time in a long time, I was excited to see what it would bring.